Welcome, dear panelists. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think this is my third sustainability conclave at the Business World, and it's such a pleasure to see familiar faces in the audience and among the organizing team. Let's kickstart our conversation, very, very pertinent in current times. Climate action for India, given our NDC goals. My first question to my panel is, and we'll start from Tejashree, Sandeep, Rinku, and Prashanth, and Ashwin, of course. As India scales its climate ambitions, what is the most impactful, innovative technologies being deployed in your respective sectors? And you do represent quite diverse sectors. And how are these technologies enhancing the climate resilience of your industry and the economy as a whole? Please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think very pertinent. I come from a company which is a conglomerate of 14 businesses. The group has traversed over 127 years, so virtually seen the transition on sustainability and the consciousness on specifically on environmental aspects, but which has always been fundamentals on which the organization has operated. Just to come quickly to answer what you are trying to say, and looking at the diversity of businesses, I think a few of our businesses have a large impact on the whole climate scenario. One being the construction or the real estate sector, where built spaces today we know can impact up to around 30% of climate transition. And I'm very happy to share that, and many people may know that the whole green building movement in India was started by Godrej and Boyce, with the first platinum rated green building being constructed in Hyderabad, the CII Sorabji Godrej Green Business Center. But now is a time to transition from green buildings to net zero buildings, and we have partnered with the World Green Building Council to promote this concept in Asia Pacific region, and obviously the group has a commitment to transition all its buildings to net zero on energy, water, waste and carbon. So looking at all the aspects of environmental footprint and transition to net zero. The other avenue where we see a lot of energy in the future being used is in the cooling sector, because today we know that the cooling has a very low penetration yet in India, and it has a huge scope of growth as we see climate change impacts. So working on the cooling technologies through innovation is a very primary focus. In fact, Godrej and Boyce was the first company in India to transition from CFC based refrigerators to completely non-CFC based with a very low global warming potential refrigerant choice way back in 2000. And I think it is one multilateral collaboration across countries which has really been a success story in terms of climate transition. But taking that forward, we are now moving towards non-gas based cooling and looking at a technology called solid state cooling, which is akin to semiconductor kind of a technology, which can be a game changer in the whole cooling sector. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chandni, and pleasure to see you here. I think so 3 years, yeah. Chandni, I'll take a step back. We were in COP 28. Now, a lot of commitments were made in terms of, how we will move away from fuel and the fossil fuels, and see that there is some kind of number which could really make a lot of difference.
Yes.
How are those commitments now getting into action? That's a question which we have to ask us when we are meeting everyone in COP 29. Another very important aspect, in last 30 years, I was just doing a research before coming here. In last 30 years, there are about 3,500 policies being made in the world on climate change. And in that, about 50 policies have come from India. And these are the policies which have come in last 7 years. Now, the impact of these policies into how we are going to be moving into our aspects, we have that target of 500 gigawatt. Uh, we are the fifth largest in the solar. Quite a few of us are from renewable, so we would know that, and we are proud of it. In fact, uh, the
But how
other
is it really changing, for example, from a tech background, the sector that you represent? Do you think the AI and the digital solutions are really helping us become more climate resilient going in the future?
yeah, so when we started this journey, I was more looking at the internal aspects, seeing that how Tech Mahindra would be kind of more into, getting as, net zero targets, which, we are quite on the target to meet it. There are a number of solutions that we have built up, and just about 2 weeks back, something very innovative that we launched. Chandni, this was for all IT companies. Coding is the key. So even if you're doing something on the PLCs or even on the the automation part of it, or how the AI is being looked at, the important is, are my codes green or not? And if there is a recurrence of, or there is a memory which is being used for a larger aspect, how are my codes green? So we have made a tool, a platform called Green Coder, and this platform will convert every code into a 30 to 40% more green efficient. Something very.
Fantastic. Congratulations
Thank
there,
you. Thank
Sandeep.
you. Yeah.
Moving on to Rinku, there's so much to be done. And you represent a very important part of our industry. So, how are you seeing at Apollo Tyres the transformation happening in your sector? And how is that contribution going to really charge India into meeting the climate goals?
Chandni, thank you for having us over here, first of all. And I'll kind of build the story from what Sandeep just mentioned, because I think we both might have a similar kind of area as well to talk about, because he's talking about climate change and India. And when we talk about in India, and I just kind of talk about in terms of the renewable energy sector, because we do have a aspiration to be, net zero by 2070, but let's just look at the renewable energy sector, where we have pegged some kind of smaller milestones as well in terms of 2030, 50% of our electricity should be from renewable spaces, from non-fossil fuel. And I think when you look at that kind of landscape, there is a huge amount of work that's happened. And from the aspiration of being 500 gigawatts, and we have actually in the last few years, I was looking at it, how we have amplified it, and that's really, really great. But what you also look at is the fossil fuel side of it. Like coal production has gone up from last year to now. So that's where you kind of know that business as usual is not just the solution. You need to come up with some kind of more innovative solutions. And of course, what Sandeep was talking about is the climate policies, which is an enabler. And in fact, I also read something which is like 1,500 policies across the world, 6 continents, 43 countries, but only 63 of those such policies are actually helping the world to be containing to 1.5 degrees. So innovation is definitely required whilst we look at investment as well, financing aside. Coming back to what Apollo Tyres is doing. So now, as a tire manufacturer, one has to be mindful it's not just a tire like a round shape where exactly, like it's just on the road, because it does have, when you look at the use phase of a tire, there is a maximum emissions as well. So how do you embrace technology? So there are various aspects in manufacturing at the end of life tire, and I'll just give you one example over here. During the manufacturing process of a tire, the most energy intensive area is mixers, which creates a lot of emission. So there we've embraced technology, IoTs, and trying to get reporting out from the mixer technology, where we actually see how we can optimize production and have efficient use of energy as well. So that's the
Fantastic,
kind of.
Rinku. I'll just stop you there.
Yeah, that's fine.
In the
That's
interest of
fine.
time.
So, yeah.
Prashanth, HUL is a global company and you are present in multiple jurisdictions. How critical is India to you and India's aim for climate resilience? And let's go beyond a little energy, because one of the things HUL has to kind of really think about is the water management side of things. And we heard Bisleri CEO speak so eloquently about water credits. So what are your views and in a very succinct way? Thank you.
I think, a couple of things. So HUL, obviously, most people know HUL through the brands which we sell, from Surf Excel to Lifebuoy, Dove, Red Label, among others, right? Two things. One is the need for climate action has never been more visible, right? And I think that's not just in the world. I think even in India, whether it's the government, whether it's the private sector, more and more people are getting aware of the fact that we need to take climate action immediately. The challenge with India, of course, is we also have developmental goals, right? We do have, if you look at Viksit Bharat, even the government has called out saying, look, we need to become a developed country with positive well-being and health for all our citizens. But at the same time, we need to take climate action, right? So I'll just talk about two things about what HUL has been doing. And I concur with you. I think energy transition has been a phenomenal success story in India. The move to solar, the move to renewables. I think as a large corporate, because we sell physical products, much like my co-panelists, the big action for us is to really work with our suppliers, right? So once we commit and say, okay, look, we're getting to net zero by 2039, we start working with our suppliers, and our suppliers range from really large listed companies, many of whom are going to be here today, to small startups. So working with our suppliers to help us in our material transition is going to be very, very important, right? They come up with new technologies, which we then sort of help facilitate to help them land through pilots. And pilots for us are actually large numbers, could be 50,000 tons. We actually end up calling it a pilot. So one example I can tell you is Surf Excel, which is a detergent brand. We have actually done I would say a large scale pilot of launching a near net zero soda ash. So soda ash is a very, very important part of, detergents. So how do you really reduce emissions in soda ash through both use of renewable energy and technology? Last thing I just want to mention, I think this game is going to accelerate. I think Sandeep also spoke about policies, whether it's policy, whether it's investor action. But I think it's going to be very, very important for large corporates to work with their suppliers, to work with their partners to accelerate this.
Thank you, Prashanth. Moving on to Ashwin, I welcome and thank you for joining us online. Can you hear us, please? We can't hear you. So if you can unmute. Yes, fantastic. Ashwin, would you be able to chime in on the current focus on climate resilience from the perspective of carbon capture and what you are doing at Adani Cement to ensure that, India's progress is more holistic when it comes to climate action?
Yeah, Chandni, thank you for your questions, and thank you Business World for inviting me. My apology basically is for not being able to join in person, but we are basically as you know, cement is hard, basically it's hard to avoid, that kind of the sector which we are operating. But at the same time, if you look at basically the Indian cement industry, and particularly which I am basically the representing, Adani cement business, where we are basically Ambuja Cement, SCC, then we are now basically Sanghi Cement, Penna Cement. So we have basically conglomerate of so many cement companies, where basically we are all encompassed under Adani Cement business. So especially Ambuja Cement and SCC, they were basically the pioneers in terms of their commitment to the sustainable action plans, whether it is water, or whether basically it is the blended cement, or whether basically the community initiatives, or basically the investment on waste heat recovery or climate friendly technologies, right? So I will say two parts. One is currently what we are doing. So we are investing basically a lot in terms of converting our current gray energy into the green energy, especially the electricity. So we are investing somewhere around 6,000 crore on basically generating 1,000 megawatt solar and wind. Then somewhere around 4,000 crore on waste heat recovery, and then basically say 2,500 crore on alternate fuels and raw materials, right? And then something on basically say ramping up the supply chain, right? So large investments which we are making basically say to make us more climate friendly and those things. Now
It's quite
and then we have a
commendable,
public
Ashwin,
commit. Yeah,
that you have mentioned your competitors and shown them in very beautiful light that they're doing some wonderful work in climate transition. Thank you for that. I'm so sorry I'm cutting you short there because you've already
yeah,
shared with us certain examples. Do you want to add
yeah.
something else?
Yeah, so as far as CCUs are concerned, no, so CCUs still very say emerging technologies. Say recently, basically, we are partnering with one of the company which is also basically say partnering with Department of Science and Technologies, and there we are putting up one pilot plant for the CCUs. And once we have basically the success, then we will say try to replicate it very fast.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ashwin. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Moving on, and I get a little kind of single thread, if I can draw upon whatever you guys have just mentioned right now, is a lot of pilots, a lot of testing. Is it go to market worthy? Is it scalable worthy? Or what is the efficiency out there? So, if I was to move ahead and look at resource efficiency and circularity, I mean, obviously, these are two very efficient teams in a planet which, we are, really challenging planetary boundaries as far as we continue to extract critical minerals and resources. I would like the panel to reflect on, as we move forward to reducing wastes and optimizing resource use, how are your respective organizations implementing circular economy principles? And what impact do these initiatives have on your overall sustainability targets?
So I think if you look at the policy regime today, it talks more of an end of pipe circularity in terms of all the EPRs that we have for e-waste, plastic, batteries, C&D waste. Approach we take is of a life cycle approach, starting with the design. Because I think that's where you can truly bring in a change in the way you are conceptualizing or producing a product, looking at the material, looking at optimizing of design. Very important aspect that we also look at is the recyclability and dismantleability of the product to enable circularity at the end of life of the product particularly. And many examples I can give through our furniture business, appliances business, but we are also recycling construction and demolition waste for producing material which go back in buildings as building blocks. We've also tried and introduced use of recycled aggregate and sand in the mixed design for 3D concrete printing, which is also an emerging technology, which is more cleaner, which is more leaner, as well as with a reduced footprint of construction and more modular. But having said that, I think what I mentioned earlier in terms of life cycle approach is a very good tool in terms of comparing what change you are bringing about based on what your earlier designs and products were, and identify those hotspots where you can take meaningful action to bring down the overall footprint of the product. What it has resulted in, we have a revenue target under our sustainability program of transitioning all of our products towards being more sustainable and green. And while we have a target of at least 50% of our revenue should come from products which are green, preferably third party certified green, today we are at around 35%. So the whole push is to mainstream sustainability in your business thinking, right at the conceptualizing thread, may it be service or your product, including processes and our establishments. But I think that we had already been doing. It is more bringing what you can take to your consumers through your products as a concept on sustainability, looking at its impact also during the use phase.
You have to ace that.
Yeah, so see, I took something very different. I made a public commitment saying that all my locations, my own locations, would be ZWL certified, zero waste to landfill certified by 25-26. And today when I speak to you, I've already met my about 70% target.
Fantastic.
So there's a commitment that you will do it, and then you get a third party to assess it. And the third party assessment says that yes means all the non-compliances which really come up during these assessments, you clean them up. So today we have locations which are zero discharge facilities. My employees, we have almost about 1,43,000 employees. So all those employees, the awareness plays a very important role. So getting them aware in terms of how the wastage has to be stopped, how are they really using the same kind of aspects even growing back home. So I think that these are some of the best practices that one should look at.
Phenomenal. Rinku?
Building up in terms of when you talk about circularity, one of the very important things in tire industry is when the tire reaches its end of life, how you actually not making sure that it's not it's disposed in a very environmental friendly manner. And there it's very, very important that you're actually looking at how you retrieve the rubber back so that you're not relying on virgin material. So that's something we've been looking at in terms of how we've partnered with a Canadian organization where we're devulcanizing rubber in a non-chemical manner and taking it back into a product mix. And that's where we have commitments as well, how much of recycled material we will use, that commitment of by 2030, but also making sure that the durability, longevity of the tire is there. That's one aspect where we're actually looking at taking our own material back into the tire itself. The other thing is in terms of waste for others can be useful for us as well. So one example that I can talk about is where we're in a tire, there are lots of other material that's required as well, nylon, polyester for a tire manufacturer. So what we've done is we've used plastic waste to actually make nylon and polyester and try to use that in our product line cycle, durability, testing, safety, all of those aspects are being seen. But these are most important because it's not just looking at your industry, which is creating waste, but it's also looking at waste that's being created outside. So circularity overall is very, very essential. And that's where I thought I'll just kind of highlight those two examples.
Beautifully done. Thank you so much. Prashanth?
Chandni, I think the advantage of going last is, exactly.
Ashwin is last.
Ashwin is there after me, sorry. I just 2 points. I think one is, I'm very happy that circularity is being discussed in a climate action panel, right? And circularity is something which is there in every Indian's DNA. We have always grown up reusing things. I think it's now a fancy term which has come back from the West. And I think even at HUL, we try and lead circularity thinking for Unilever, right? I won't speak about the innovations. I think there's a whole work stream again happening on how do we introduce recycled plastic in flexibles. It's already there in rigids like PET and also HDPE, but even in flexibles, there's a whole value chain going on. But one thing which I want to add over here is, number one, anything on circularity in India also requires, the sanitation ecosystem to develop. So a big part of our program is how do we work with the government, how do we work with other multilaterals like the UN, and maybe startups, civic society organizations on just making sure that waste collection improves, right? And because as India urbanizes, all of us are going to be consuming more, everything from motorbikes to detergent to handbags. So material consumption is going to go up, right? So the circularity ecosystem also needs to go up, which means that people who are Safai Sathis, waste pickers also need to be included in the ecosystem. So that's one focus of ours. The second focus of ours, again, going back to innovation, is how do we support new startups which are working on circularity. So we have a very innovative program called Transform. So if you're a circularity startup, we provide you with a grant. There is no equity. It's only a grant. And we give you business support along with Ernst & Young on helping you scale up, with the ultimate goal being that maybe in 5 years, you can be a supplier to HUL, which is very hard because you need to reach those volumes at that price point. So A, circular economy needs to grow, and B, I think innovation needs to be developed. But I think India can lead for the world in this space.
Fantastic. Very well put. Ashwin, over to you. If you could chime in something about...
Yeah, I think cement is a great opportunity. If you look at basically from the waste management and the circularity is concerned. Today, Indian cement industry, we are somewhere around 550 to 600 million ton. And in next, say 7 years time, it will cross certainly say 1 billion ton capacity with the basically say growth in the housing and the infrastructure. And cement is quite basically say natural, no? So if we look at Indian cement industry particular, basically say learning from our global peer, no, we have become quite matured and very professional in the waste management, right? So we use basically say waste from across the basically the country, whether it's a municipal waste, whether it's an industrial waste, whether it's a slag, fly ash, what kind of construction and demolition waste, whatever is not, right? So everything basically we are using it, and we can by and large solve the lot of problems from the industry, from the society, from the regulators, everywhere, right? So we have willingness basically to invest. We have also the capability and the know-how basically to basically say solve the waste management problems of the industry and the country. Only thing basically say what we need was is the proper regulatory framework, to say do it properly.
Great, Ashwin. So it's all on the shoulders of the policymakers. We have the know-how, we have the finance, but the policymakers are a bit slow on that. No worries. Take your point very well. And given the fact that you talked about investing and capital and finance, let's move on to climate finance as a topic of discussion. Now, I come from financial services. So for me, sustainable finance is something from a sourcing perspective and where do we allocate monies from. But you represent the real economy and you have to absorb that capital so that that capital keeps in circulation. My question to the panel is, what are the securing as well as applying finance for large scale climate oriented projects within your organizations? Is it a challenge? Is sourcing that financing a challenge, or is applying it in a productive, remunerative manner a challenge? And how is your company really approaching the whole acronym called sustainable finance and climate finance? What does it mean for you?
Fortunately for me, for my company, we have been self-financing our sustainable initiatives. But nonetheless, I think being in the industry, we know the challenges that we face. I think securing finance today, I think it's still something which is in as a developmental aspect on sustainability, and more work really needs to be accelerated in this for smaller companies to really bear the cost of being more sustainable, and how do they transition to be continuity or longevity of the businesses. What we do in turn is actually support our supply chain in becoming those clean tech solutions that we desire for, because of the agility that they have, and support them in terms of longevity of business that we give them, so that they sustain and develop into more defined companies who provide the solutions to the industry. But having said that, yes, there are aspects where we are looking at probably finance for our programs which are more sustainable, maybe the infrastructure or maybe building sector. But what is important is that that program to demonstrate its sustainability, its quotient of greenness or sustainability by very, very measurable and demonstrable indicators, so that the financing companies are sure about where they are investing and what is the long-term benefit that the organization or those investments are going to be on the climate, to fulfill their agenda of I think investing in sustainable ventures. So not much light I can throw on this, because I'm not have been on the other side of actually utilizing this, but we've been more supporting the value chain in terms of transitioning towards more sustainable supply chain by supporting them through various aspects on financing.
Just staying with Tejashree on this. Tejashree, when you said that you are helping your supply chain and you are investing in them so that they can have go-to models on how to support your green movement, have you put a fund together for this, or is this through your CSR fund? Do reflect on that.
So not through the CSR fund, because this is a business cost, we believe. CSR is for the society, and there are different movements over there in terms of skill building and entrepreneurship. But I think this is a business cost, and if not today, tomorrow you have to pay that cost in terms of, say, carbon price or tax or whatever. So proofing your business against that today is, I think, a prudent way of moving ahead on the business. But we don't put a fund aside, but we look at the overall business process where this is going to benefit us in terms of our long-term sustainability goals and devise mechanisms. So each case requires a different kind of push. You can't generalize it probably for even the suppliers. But we've seen success stories where a very MSME vendor has today exporting their products to European countries, because of the sustainability quotient they have demonstrated, onboarding on our cluster programs for our vendors to look at both quality, to look at both efficiencies as well as sustainability into various aspects of their manufacturing.
Fantastic, fantastic. Sandeep, over to you.
So, Chandni, I was just mulling over, and I think so. You read my mind. I was already about to say that carbon pricing is what is the key. We were among the first companies to have implemented the carbon pricing within the system. So that gave me a leverage in terms of, I don't have to go and ask funds to anyone. So I take a decision saying that if today this solar or any technology equipment has to be bought in, it becomes very simple for me to do that. So carbon pricing is one aspect which I would really ask others also to have a look at it. How does that work? Chandni, on the other aspect, about a year back, I spoke to you about one tool that we were trying to build around is Green Finance. So, that is taking some shape. So this is one platform that we are really looking at. Today, if you look at the BFSI sector, there is no end-to-end tool to look at the green funds, the green bonds. Means world is speaking about it, but the hardcore fact is how is it getting monitored? There's no single methodology to do it. So that is a place where we are working on from an innovation perspective. And if there's any support which can come in, I'll be more than happy to take that support there. But this is one tool which we would want to, kind of put it up so that it becomes a model for everyone to look at.
So, Sandeep, so that platform is basically providing transparency on flow of capital.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. That's an amazing initiative.
That also means is that today, suppose you're giving a loan to a renewable company which is putting up a plant. Now, are you checking up that the land is a right land? Does the water levels have the right benefits there? So you go into that detail, go every aspect, check the water levels, and then you give the loans.
Fantastic. This is over and above what is required by the Central Pollution Control Board.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Just to build up on that, I think one of the other facts when you're talking about climate finance is also how the reporting has leapfrogged in the last few years. And that has actually, I see it as an enabler because that's helped the investors and the OEMs and all the other stakeholders to ask pertinent questions. So that's where it's kind of gaining a lot of momentum, and of course it's helped as well in terms of when you have your debt funding, your interest rate goes down and all that stuff. So that's really, really helpful. Saying that we've never, for us, it's mainly the projects have been funded internally, most of them, and just resonating with what my co-panelists mentioned, I'm total believer of internal carbon pricing as well. We've also got that developed, and in fact, along with the ROI of projects, we actually look at how ICP can be an enabler in terms of calculating what it means for the organization if the project should go ahead or not go ahead in the long run. So that is something that we've done for both our locations in India and Europe, because obviously the policies are very, very different. With European Green Deal, it's very, very different. The cost is very different. So that's something we've done, and I definitely would kind of recommend that. And I think that's one of the things I thought I'd just highlight over here.
Very well, very well. This is very important, reflecting on what are the carbon prices, and I think they're now north of 60 euros.
Yes.
At one point of time, they touched a high of 90.
Absolutely.
So we have to be very cognizant of the fact that if we have linkages into the European market, we need to be abreast so that we don't impact our EXIM situation. Prashanth, over to you. How would you reflect on climate finance and sustainable finance?
Not much to add, but I have not met a single financier in the last year or so who is not aware of climate action and the need for climate finance. I think the move has gone to risk, right? And particularly, what is the risk which corporates are carrying, or what is the risk in the economy because of climate impact? Just want to add one point, I think, on climate adaptation particularly. And as corporate India becomes bigger, CSR funds are becoming bigger and bigger. I think there's a great opportunity for corporate India to use CSR funds, particularly for climate adaptation projects. India is probably, South Asia is one of the most vulnerable parts of the world when it comes to climate change, whether it is, forget heat waves, whether it is floods, whether it is landslides. So I think that's a good space to actually look at positive projects. Number two is, I actually also think that CSR can be really used for funding research, with all the fantastic research facilities which we have in India across our engineering colleges, on funding research on new solutions towards climate adaptation and mitigation.
Everything needs money. Ashwin, over to you. Any thoughts on climate finance? And if you can keep it succinct,
nothing much to add. I only reflect one point now. Under basically the Global Cement, Concrete and Association, we basically say we had one or we have formed one roadmap, which is basically the net zero roadmap till 2050, right, for the industry as a whole, for the Indian cement industry. And after basically the exercising all possible levers, finally our conclusion was because still we need to reach to the net zero, 35-37% CO2 still to be basically say reduced through the carbon capture, right? And carbon capture is quite say emerging and very expensive technology as of now. So we are just wondering basically say whenever basically say we are reaching to certain stage, how to fund that carbon capture basically the installations, right? So I think say it's basically the great potential going forward. How we can basically say have a proper framework for basically the climate financing, and how the industry can basically say benefit through the right intention.
Thank you, Ashwin. That's quite useful. And I do know Adani Group has been coming out with a number of sustainable bonds, and I think green climate bonds as well. So use of proceeds is a critical way of measuring KPIs around how you're implementing your sustainability initiatives. So thank you. I think our time is up. It was my sincere pleasure and honor to have you panelists on the desk, and very insightful conversations. I got a lot to learn, and I have to catch up with Sandeep on the platform, and I'm sure it's just scaling up quite beautifully. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dada.